All right, welcome back to the Artist Connection podcast. This is Matt Kesar. Very special episode today. This is Tommy James Day at the old podcast. So, welcome, sir, Tommy James.
Thank you so much. Great to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm a little tongue-tied here. It's great to have a legend like you on here. And I read your book, Me, the Mob, and the Music. One hell of a ride with Tommy James and the Shondells, and just speechless. Incredible book.
Well, thank you.
Story.
You know, it's the first time I've been an author. And so we were so pleased when we got the reaction from the fans and from the media and so forth. It's in its 7th printing now.
Wow.
And it's going to be a movie and a Broadway show. So, you know, we weren't expecting any of that. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be an interesting couple of years.
Well, the beauty part of the book is it reads like a movie to me. I mean, it's just a beautiful narrative from the beginning to the end where you're talking to a guy who doesn't really know who Morris Levy was, and it's like, well, sit down, son, let me tell you the story.
Right.
And then you read through your whole life, and then it wraps up with, hey, the interview's over. So you can visualize this thing as a movie. So whoever's going to translate it to the big screen is not going to have a tough job at all.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice. I'm glad you liked it. You know, the unfortunate part is it's true.
Yeah.
And you know, it's essentially an autobiography with about 2/3 of it devoted to our very crazy and oftentimes dangerous relationship with Roulette Records in New York, where we signed.
Yeah.
And the reason it was dangerous is because Roulette was basically a front for the Genovese crime family in New York, in addition to being a functioning record label,
right,
which it was, and a pretty good little independent label, but they were, you know, they were flat out run by the mob guys. And Morris Levy, of course, the notorious head of the record company, was one of them. And the people we were rubbing shoulders with were very notorious people, and of course we couldn't talk about any of this.
Right.
And so the gist of the story is that there we are trying to have a career in rock and roll with this very sinister, dark story going on behind us that we couldn't talk about.
It's just amazing how quickly you got caught up in all of it. And I want to get into the early days too, but you arrive in New York, you're being courted by all these different labels. He you know, seeks you out, finds you, and hey, he's mine. And the next thing you know, well, you're on this journey.
That's true. Our first hit, you know, our first record, Hanky Panky, exploded out of Pittsburgh. It was a local hit in Pittsburgh. I'm originally from Michigan, but 2 years after we originally released the record, it took off. So I was in high school when we recorded this record, and I was just out of high school when the record hit in Pittsburgh, and it was bootlegged and sold 80,000 copies in 10 days, and suddenly we were number one in Pittsburgh. So I go to Pittsburgh and sort of pick up the first bar band I can find, who were terrific musicians that became the Shondells, because I couldn't put the original Shondells back together again. And I go to New York a week later with these guys, and we literally got a yes from, we wanted to get with a major label, and we literally had a thumbs up from Columbia, RCA, Kamasutra, remember Kamasutra
Absolutely.
Records, Atlantic, and just an incredible array of labels, and the very last place we went to was Roulette. And so nobody was there. We sort of left the record off, and we planned on going with, Columbia, CBS, or RCA. And so I went to bed that night in New York feeling really great. And the next morning, about 9 o'clock, I wake up, and suddenly the phone starts ringing, and all of the labels that had said yes the day before were suddenly saying, listen, we got to pass.
Wow.
So finally, Jerry Wexler at Atlantic told me the truth, what was going on, and Morris Levy, the head of Roulette Records, had called all the other labels and basically scared them and backed them down, said, this is my record. and they backed away, and we were apparently going to be on Roulette Records. That's literally how it happened. And once we got on Roulette, once we signed, the first day, we talk about it in the book of the first time I laid eyes on Morris Levy. He was right out of a movie, talk like this, and was a very rough character, and we were 18-year-old kids from the Midwest, so what did we know? So anyway, that's how it started for me.
You kind of compared him to Al Capone, but
Yes.
bigger and scarier.
That's right.
Man. So you must have been going through the culture shock alone of coming from the Midwest to New York City and having all this attention, and then all of a sudden you're caught up in this. And did it feel scary from the start, or was it something?
Well,
that
it
was
really did.
Yeah.
Yes, it did, honestly. And then, of course, we'd meet. We didn't really understand what was going on. We'd heard rumors, of course, but we'd meet somebody in Morris's office, and a week later we'd see him on TV being taken out of a warehouse in New Jersey in handcuffs, doing the perp walk, and we're going, isn't that the guy we just met up in Morris's office? And this sort of thing kept happening, and finally we gradually put all the pieces together. We'd recognize people from being on TV that were hanging around up there.
The other thing that I admire about you, and reading, like you said, the bulk of the book is devoted to your relationship with Morris Levy and Roulette, but you never, ever come across as bitter or, it almost sounds like a father-son type relationship at times.
It's strange you put it that way, because I've said it many times. It's as difficult as it was up there, and it was very hard doing business because they weren't going to pay, and it was dangerous, and they let us know that. But the fact of the matter is that if it hadn't have been for Morris Levy, there wouldn't have been a Tommy James.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. And so, it's sort of a matter of kind of giving credit where credit is due. I wouldn't have had a career without Morris. And so there's a lot of very mixed feelings about all this. And, of course, there was a lot of times of trouble up there,
sure.
too.
Was it hard for you to put this down on paper? And
it was. We had basically, when my co-author Martin Fitzpatrick and I decided to write this book, we were going to call it Crimson and Clover.
Yeah.
And we were going to write about the hits and write about hit records and songs and in the studio and make a nice music book. Would have been interesting, but we got about a third of the way into it and realized that if we don't tell the Roulette story, the whole story, we're really cheating ourselves and everybody else. But I was very uncomfortable doing that because some of these guys were still walking around.
Sure, yeah.
This is like 8 years ago. And so we put the book on a shelf for a couple of years, and in '06, the last of the Roulette regulars, as I called them, passed on.
Yeah.
And we felt we could finish the story. And so we did. It took us another almost 3 years to really get it right.
Wow.
And finally, when we released the book 2 years ago, when I should say when we were finished with the book, Simon & Schuster grabbed it immediately, which was another very flattering thing to happen because they usually, do more literary works like presidential memoirs and so forth. So, and it immediately started selling, and we were just really amazed at how it took off. And then we started getting calls for the movie rights and for the Broadway rights. And so Barbara DeFina is going to produce the film, and Barbara produced a lot of hits with Martin Scorsese. Barbara produced Hugo last year.
Nice.
She produced Casino. She produced Goodfellas. She produced The Last Temptation of Christ. She produced The Color of Money with Tom Cruise and Paul Newman. And, she's just had she did Cape Fear. She's just had a string of amazing movies, and we're just so proud that she wants to do our movie. I just am really thrilled about that.
And that is very exciting, and also thinking about translating it to Broadway as well. I mean, it's just with your music and your songs. My God, this is a
well, thank you. The thing that's weird though is that they're really two totally different ways of presenting the same story. You know, the Broadway, which is going to be after the movie because we don't want them bumping heads.
Right.
But the Broadway show is going to be, kind of lighthearted and